Hey folks, as promised, I am about to do a video that I think is going to address a problem that we have had a lot and that I consider to be quite prevalent throughout social care services, schools and other areas. Why on earth are we taking ABC data or IRF data or STAR data or incident data or whatever it is that you want to call it? Why do people think they're taking it? What needs to go on these recordings? Where does it go once we've done them? How are we making sure that this just isn't a paperwork exercise? So when I was thinking about this, I asked myself why I think we need this video. And actually, when I put it up on a couple of different places, I put it up that I was going to do this on LinkedIn and on Facebook. And there were like loads of people who came back and were like, either messaged me or had a couple of people even commented on the post where they were like, yes, this is such a problem. Like, I'm looking forward to this video. And it made me feel like, well, at least this just isn't me who's having this problem. So sometimes when we go into work with services, and there are a couple of things that can happen. Either you ask to see the ABC or STAR incident data, and you will be handed from either the staff room or a drawer or something, like a pile. Here you go, this is what we have. And you think, wow, you could blow the cobwebs off this stuff. Like, you know, why? What good does it do anyone when it's sitting in a drawer? Like, what do you actually do with this? Sometimes when I ask people, like, if I ask a support worker, so what happens with your ABC data? Like, do you know why you're filling these out? A lot of the time they'll tell me they just have to. They'll tell me about the health and safety aspect requirement of it, you know, the accident recording. They'll tell me that, sometimes they'll tell me, oh, well, you know, they go to the team leader, but they don't actually know what happens after that. Like, they don't know what the purpose of doing this is for. And I think that is like not reinforcing, you know, as positive behaviour support, we are behaviour analysts, or, you know, we should be at the heart of it, you know, and we've got to understand what reinforces the behaviour of the staff that we work with, not just the individuals that we work with. And I think that this is just crazy, like it's just ludicrous. So I want to talk about what we think the purpose of these recordings are, what information needs to be in them, you know, why we should be doing them. This is not just a paperwork exercise. Health and safety requirements aside, you know, regulatory requirements aside, that there is a purpose to these recordings. And if you're not using them well, then you're essentially wasting your own time. I'm going to start by describing the most commonly used format. Okay, ABC, antecedent behaviour consequence. A lot of the time when I go in and I ask people, do you take ABC data? They say, yes, this is good. A lot of the time when they hand you this data, they are filling out ABC forms, but they are not taking ABC data. So, antecedent behaviour consequence. Sometimes it looks like this. Okay, little form. Some people only take ABC data, so that might comprise their whole incident form, in which case there is bound to be a bunch of other information that's required about any physical effects, you know, bruising, cuts, etc., and what staff were on, you know, all that kind of information. Other people only use ABC data for minor events, things that don't constitute an actual incident, and that's another problem, you know, the difference between an incident and an ABC that I'll talk about at the end. Okay, so sometimes we call the ABC the three-term contingency, and basically what forms the A and the C really influence whether or not the behaviour is likely to occur again in the future. And that is something for your PDS practitioner to worry about figuring out. In terms of completing the ABC forms, you just need to focus on getting the content right. You don't need to focus on figuring out, you know, what does this all mean? Now, ABCs are fine, and actually, you know, a lot of people use them, and some people can use them to great effect. I, however, am a much bigger fan of the STAR recording. So the STAR recording is what we would call the four-term contingency. And essentially, it takes the three-term contingency and it splits the A into two. And I think this is really important. So STAR stands for setting event, trigger, action, result. S and T in a STAR form equate to A in an ABC, so that's where the extra part of it comes from. Setting events are probably one of the most poorly understood parts of an ABC/STAR/IRF recording, but actually the most important in my mind. And I'm going to give you, or well, some of the most important in my mind. I'm going to give you an example. So I went to visit a service once, and it was a young woman, 23 I think she was. She had autism, and she was really struggling with her behaviour. And she was clearly very distressed a lot of the time. And I was in doing some what we call direct observations, which means I am there in person observing the staff and the young woman, in real life settings. And the doorbell went. I think it was the postman or something. And instantly, like that, the behaviour started, and she started to headbang. And I said to the staff member, "Oh, that's really interesting. So clearly, the doorbell there was a trigger." And the staff member said to me, "Well, no, not really, because there's a lot of the time, the doorbell will go and she'll be fine with that." And I was like, okay, so what you're telling me is that the doorbell can be a trigger, but that actually there are setting events in play that mean that it is or is not effective sometimes. So a setting event is something that makes us more sensitive to the triggers that we encounter as we go through life. And everyone will see this in their own life as well. If you have a great day at work and you're in a super space and the bank account's healthy, you've just been given a bonus and you go home and you're like, you fly through and there's zero traffic on the way home. If your kids are being difficult, when you get home, you are so much more likely to tolerate that well, or to cope with it well, and to respond to them in the way that you really wish you would. If you had had a really crap day at work and the traffic was awful and you actually had like a speeding fine instead of a bonus at work, you get home and your kids are being really difficult, you're going to respond to that quite differently. In both of those examples, your children's behaviour is the trigger for your own, whether you shout at them or whether you storm up to your room, so either verbal aggression or withdrawal. The setting events are the things that occurred in your day throughout that to influence whether or not you were going to respond to that trigger. And I think if we're not actively recording those events, then we really can't understand a person's behaviour well. I think there is a big problem where we oversimplify behaviour analysis. I think there is a big problem where we oversimplify how behaviour develops, how it is maintained, and the contingencies that support it. I think a lot of the time when people are filling out these ABC forms, even if they are putting in information about real triggers, they often equate A to only mean what happened like immediately before the incident, and therefore you're missing all that information about the setting events. And I think to just reduce what somebody's behaviour to just that immediate moment and not the bigger picture can really, it can give us a concept about that person's behaviour and understanding that behaviour that is either not comprehensive, it's not contextualised, or sometimes I think it's just wrong. So in terms of what information needs to go in each of these 4 sections, I am only going to focus on STAR because it really is my preferred. If you call your incident recording something else, like incident recording forms or just incident reports or whatever, they will typically follow either that ABC or that STAR format, even if they're not called that. They might not even be sideways. It might not be like STAR. It might be like STAR, and it might ask questions like what happened before the event rather than describe it as an antecedent. Either way, it should follow this system. Okay, so setting events are things that sensitize a person to their environment. So what that means is things that make us more or less likely to respond in a particular way when a potential trigger is in front of us. So, for example, that might be if I haven't had enough caffeine, or it might be if I didn't sleep well, if I'm worried or anxious about a particular event, perhaps my dog's at the vet or something and I'm thinking about that. Whether I have gone a long time without medication, whether I have had an epileptic event, lots of epileptic seizures and things over the past few weeks. Really anything that you think could have made the behaviour more likely, but doesn't cause it in a particular moment in time. Then we're going to move on, so that's setting event, S. Then we are going to move on to T. T is a trigger. The most annoying thing to read in this box is no trigger. That is not physically possible. A person does not just start engaging in challenging behaviour for no reason. They do not materialise into existence mid-challenge. That does not happen. Now, what is very, very possible is that I don't know what the trigger is. Maybe I didn't see it. Maybe there was an intense stomach pain or, a toothache, or maybe there's a smell that they're particularly aware of that I'm not aware of. any of, or maybe I wasn't in the room when the behavior started, so actually I just haven't got a clue. That is fine. And if you do not know what the trigger was, then it is absolutely acceptable to write, I don't know. But the idea of no trigger contributes to this sense of feeling powerless about doing anything about it. If you're working with someone and you genuinely believe that there is nothing that controls whether or not these problem behaviours occur, then you are going to feel utterly helpless. And your staff team is going to feel utterly helpless because they will not have a sense of power or control over a really difficult situation, or a sense of hope that they'll be able to do something about it in the future. And for the record, by control, I don't mean control over that other person. I mean control over how to respond. When I am talking to staff teams, I will often be like, right, so if something is a genuine trigger, then we should in theory be able to put a timestamp on that. You know, Tia was really hormonal, she was tired, she hadn't had enough coffee, she came home and her husband did this at 6:17 and it caused verbal aggression on Tia's part. You know, her husband told her to calm down at 6:17 and that created verbal aggression. All of the tired, hormonal, coffee, with lack of coffee, etc. They were all setting events. They're all things that made my behaviour more likely. The trigger was my husband telling me to calm down, and I can put a timestamp on that. Like, I can tell you exactly what time that happened. In terms of action, this is the person's behaviour. So the B in the ABC. If a person starts self-injuring, then I need to be able to really understand what you mean by that statement. The most annoying thing to occur in this particular box is when people write things like they were agitated, or he kicked off, or he behaved unreasonably, or targeted me, or except I cannot imagine that. And my guidance for, as in, I mean, I can't see it in my head. My guidance for staff teams under this circumstance is you should be describing the behaviour specifically enough that I can draw it. So if you are saying to me, Jack hit himself on the head with his right hand, you know, I could do a like little Google doodle sketch of what I imagine that would look like in real life. If you're saying to me, Jack was agitated, I can't draw that. I don't know what agitated looks like for that person. So you need to be specific enough. And one general rule with all of these things is they do not need to be essays. I do not need full sentences. I am not interested in whether or not you have capitalized the right things or whether your spelling is correct. That is not the purpose of these recordings. And actually, if people are worried that they have to get all of that stuff right, it can put them off trying to record them really well. I just thought of one last rule for recording this information, which is always, always, always be respectful. You know, be consciously respectful. I think the mere fact that somebody is, you know, if I imagine it was me, you know, when I was having a bad day, if somebody was going and writing about that, for the next person who came to see me to know about, and, you know, for it to get put back to my social worker and whatever, that would just be not a great fun game. So whenever you are describing these events, it's really important that you do. I think it's key to stick to the facts and be really kind of objective about it, and to make sure that whatever we're writing is what needs to be there, and that we are writing it as far as is possible without judgment. Okay, and finally R is the result. So what happened in response to this behaviour? And you need to rack your brains and think about it. You know, don't just told Jack his behaviour was unreasonable, because ultimately that is unlikely to be the only thing that happened in response to his self-injury. There's a good chance that people came to speak to him. There's a good chance that people left him alone. There's a good chance that whatever demand it was that was being placed on him at the time, maybe some personal care demands or come and help me with your hoovering, that ceased for a moment. Those are the kind of things we need to know about. And actually, a lot of the time if people say to me, well, I told him his behaviour was unreasonable, and this keeps coming up in ABC forms, then I have to ask, why are you doing that? Because it doesn't sound like it's being successful. You know, if we are doing something in response to a person's behaviour, it should be for one reason only, and that is to try and make them safe and to try and reduce the chance of that potentially not safe behaviour occurring again in the future. And a lot of the time, responses like that's not acceptable behaviour are unlikely to achieve those outcomes. Ooh, rant over there. Sorry. Okay, so once you have completed your star chart, What needs to happen with that information? Okay, so there's a couple of things that really does not need to happen with that form. It does not need to sit in a file for years and years and years. If you have regulatory requirements in terms of keeping information, then that's one thing. But it being on a recording sheet is going to achieve nothing on its own. Something has to happen with that information. The real power of these recordings is that they offer us an insight into behavioural patterns and into patterns of antecedents or consequences, setting events or triggers, that then allow us to formulate really evidence-based strategies to support that person that are likely to have an impact. So for the young woman who struggled with the doorbell going off, you know, there was obviously extra work to be done in terms of figuring out what her setting events were. But there were such a plethora of strategies that we could put in place to help her tolerate loud noises when those setting events were in play. You know, we could have gone down lots of routes in terms of encouraging her to wear ear defenders, or encouraging her to put some preferred noises on, you know, some of the white noise and stuff that helps people tolerate that. So many options once we really understand that pattern, and that those kinds of stimuli are likely to serve as a trigger for her. So it's really important that we use this information wisely, and that we allocate the time to investigating these patterns appropriately. So I think my preference is that all of this information goes to whoever is responsible for behaviour support within your organisation. And that doesn't mean that it necessarily get handed in like this massive pile of ABCs to the behaviour practitioner, because that is hours and hours and hours of work. And if you support 400 people across a huge organisation and you have maybe like 10 behaviour practitioners, and they get handed, you know, that could be thousands of ABC forms that they would have responsibility to review every single month, and that's just not practical. But it is quite easy to train somebody to pull that information out, stick it in even like a basic Excel chart, and start to pull some graphs off of it. Now, we have more sophisticated systems for this now, because we understand the real importance of it. So we have like online systems that run that analysis for us. However, that is, you know, it doesn't need to be that way. You could literally just tally all the things, you know, go through them hand by hand and pull that information out. Once you have done that, you need to feed that information back to the staff team. It's really important that the staff team know that the information that they're recording is going somewhere, that it is being reviewed, that it is used for a purpose, and that it is worth them taking the time to fill these systems out properly. It also is really important that if you find an ABC that is poorly filled out, that you take the time to sit down with that staff member and competency-based train them through how to use these. Those ABC forms might highlight things like, okay, we are having an awful lot of incidents that require 2-to-1 in order to manage. That is then going to be information that's obviously crucial to your funding reviews and your MDT meetings. You might have notice that in the last month we have 50% more incidents than we had the month before. And when you sit down and sit with that staff team, they're going to be like, well, yeah, you know, there was a change in medication about 4 weeks ago. You're going to be able to take that data and go back and sit with the health professionals and say, look, you know, I'd be really grateful if you can sit and look with me at this, because I'm concerned that there's a correlation between this change in medication and an increase in behaviour. And we've taken the time to go through this information, and we cannot find any reason other than this change in medication that there would be this kind of an increase. That's going to be really powerful information for you to use, for your staff team to use for the benefit of this individual. And ultimately, it's really hard to argue with a graph. You know, if you are just one person that has gone in and said, I don't think that medication's any good for her, then that's kind of not all that powerful as evidence. Although obviously staff opinions are huge, but, you know, it's not going to necessarily tip the barrel in your favour. However, if you're going in with some really great recordings and 6 weeks worth of evidence on it all graphed, it's going to be really difficult for people to dismiss that. So ultimately, the last bit I wanted to talk about was what is the difference between an incident and an ABC form, because we get asked this all the time. So this is for individuals who are using ABC forms in the brief sense like this, to record lower level behaviours that are occurring so frequently that it would just be impossible to fill out a full-on incident form every single time this behaviour occurs. So maybe you are working with a person who has like a minor self-harm behaviour, maybe like they bite their hand, or something, and it's a behaviour that you're concerned about, that you really want to understand better and to support that person with, but you cannot be filling out a 4-page instant form every time this behaviour occurs, because it's occurring 50 times a day, or 25 times a day, or whatever. So a lot of the time we would use this much briefer ABC form under those circumstances, but people are not always clear, okay, it was a really bad hand biting one, like we drew blood, what's the, does that now need to become an incident form? The answer to this question is really down to the service that you work in and their policies. Obviously there are, health and health and safety things that influence this too. If somebody had really injured themselves and drawn blood, then yeah, that's going to be an incident form. But there are multiple factors. So what we have done to support services with this is, for some people we've created like a flow chart like this one, that they can follow through and really try to, it really is super clear about whether or not something should be an incident form or something should be an ABC form, and that can help with clarity and confidence when people are recording. So ultimately, I know that this is an area that other people are struggling with, because you've told me that. ABCs and star charts can be such an incredible tool. They really can give you a fantastic insight into what is governing the occurrence of a particular behaviour, but only if they're used well. You are only as good as your data. And ultimately, if you have crap ABC forms, then the assumptions that you make on the basis of those crap ABC forms are going to be unsurprisingly crap. It's really important that you spend the energy and the effort supporting your staff teams and supporting the individuals that you work with to get this right and to feel confident doing it, and that you think about this in terms of like organizational behavior. How am I making sure that I am reinforcing the staff team for engaging in the behavior that I want them to engage in, which is to write awesome behavior recordings. And finally, make sure you are doing something with it, because they will do nobody any good in the filing cabinet. All right, apologies for my rant on behavior recordings. I hope there's some useful information for you there, and if anybody would like to see any of the things I've shown you in greater detail or want to ask any questions, then you know where we are. All right, guys, take care.